Courtney Clenney's case is finally over, and as this scandal gets wrapped up, we are facing 6 years in prison for Courtney Clenney. We're going to talk about it today on The Legal Mindset. We teach you to be your own judge. Of course, I'm Andrew Esquire, American attorney, and importantly, Florida attorney, as this was a very much Florida-Miami case. So in case you were out of it, our defendant here is Courtney Clenney. Here's her prison mugshot, which is a little bit different than some of her photos. And the victim in this case here is Christian Obumseli. He passed away after this incident. So for those that have not followed this from the beginning, the incident actually happened on April 3rd, 2022. So we're talking 4 years ago, over 4 years ago now, where the OnlyFans model, that is Courtney, fatally stabbed her boyfriend with a kitchen knife during an argument in her luxury Miami apartment, One Paradiso, down there in Edgewater. Now, this was very fascinating because at first, this was a case which, if we look at what she says, was claimed to be self-defense. She said she was defending herself during a heated argument where he was looking violent, saying that he was aggressive. And she also said she threw the knife at him from 10 feet away, which is quite a distance to get the amount of penetration that we had from the medical records. And of course, the prosecution picked up on that. Now, she also claimed later there was a pattern of domestic abuse, which she added in there. So there's certain defenses like battered woman syndrome, BWS, which are come in as defenses. So she was prepared to go in there and argue that in her defense. Now, the prosecution's view was this is second degree murder. They said, looking at it, hey, look, the evidence shows that they had a tempestuous and combative relationship. That's their language. And if you look at the videos, and there's lots of video out there, you can see that they had a, spicy relationship. And they're saying that the violence was really escalating by Clenney herself. So Clenney herself was the one who was shown to be violent over the course of their relationship. Now, there was also evidence from the medical examiner. The medical examiner did not agree with the self-defense theory, did not agree with the thrown knife theory. And they looked at it and said, there's no way that a knife that's pretty large gets inside of a body for a significant level of penetration with, somebody who has no ninja skills. She's not out here doing her ninjutsu. And they're saying it's impossible to throw that knife that deep from 10 feet away. So that's just something that's kind of impossible. Now, the arrest was in 2022. She was arrested while at rehab in Hawaii. She was held without bond since then in Miami. So she's been really behind bars for almost 4 years, or actually over 4 years at this point. Now, the case was delayed for years. I was hoping to review this case, to watch it live with you guys and to go through the whole thing and see where it shakes out, see what the evidence shows, see what the witnesses say. But there were issues. The prosecution messed up. They looked at some things they shouldn't look at. They got into some computer records they shouldn't get at. There were lots of questions of the experts, the witnesses, etc. So there was a lot of evidence issues in this case, and this thing got delayed forever. But we finally have a plea deal. So August 10th, that's just the other day, we have a plea deal. She came into open court and entered into this plea willingly, voluntarily, knowing what she said, and she was found guilty of manslaughter with a deadly weapon. So that is a reduction from the charge of second-degree murder. She admitted to causing the stab wounds. She admitted it was her, and she accepted criminal responsibility. So she said, no, I am on the hook for this. I am on the line for this. Also, importantly, the victim's family approved of the deal. So the victim's family was not objecting to this. They were accepting of this deal as it came down to guilty of manslaughter with a deadly weapon. Now, that doesn't mean that the victim's family would know how they were sentenced, because that's up to the judge, right? The judge was the one who ultimately would come down with that. But they did know that, hey, if we're entering into a plea deal, this is going to be something less than the maximum amount of punishment at trial. So here's the sentencing. She got 6 years in state prison with credit for time served, which we'll get to in a second. Then 5 years of probation after she gets out. So she's got a significant amount of time if you tack on the probation. Also, conditions which go with that probation are mental health and substance abuse treatment, which I think are absolutely appropriate in her case. It seems like there's definitely some substance abuse and clearly some mental health stuff that needs to be worked out. So that's something that I think is critical in this case for her, recovery. She also served roughly 4 years since that August 22 arrest, so she expected to serve 2 more years. But mind you, she faced 30 years if convicted. So that's a huge delta between the amount she could have been serving, up to 30 years, and the amount she actually is going to end up serving, which is only 2 years beyond the 4 she's already served, right? For a total of 6. Now, one thing that's very interesting here is Florida has what's called a son of Sam law. This is very important because she does OF. So what I think people are thinking is, hey, she's going to come out and monetize this. She's going to play some pity story. She's going to try to say, woe is me and collect off of this. And the laws in Florida prevent you from profiting from accounts of the crime. So movies, TVs, books, etc., all that stuff, you cannot profit from the crime. Now, one important thing is she is an OF model. So is OF prohibited? No, it's not strictly prohibited. It doesn't say under the statute, or rather under the sentencing when they talked about it, that she could not do OF. That's not something that's out there. However, if she starts to do OF with the sob story or her accounts of the crime, or maybe she's doing some prisoner cosplay, who knows, that sort of stuff, they might be able to come back in and say, yeah, you can't do that. That's profiting off the crime. So I think they're going to pay attention. They're going to pay attention to her OF. And if she does anything that seems to be playing up to that I'm the victim here, thing, or trying to profit off of that, I think they could step in and they could hit her OF. So that's something that we'll definitely keep an eye on when she gets out of prison. Now, what's my judgment here? Well, Clenney received a light sentence compared to what was on the line. 30 years, getting 6, relatively light. I would have said up to a decade even would have been something that could have been appropriate in this case, with 4 years time served, perhaps giving her maybe 8 years. So it's 4 and 4. But she did get a relatively light charge. It is her first offense. So that's something that I think you have to factor in here, that it is relatively on the light side. However, the victim's family accepted the deal. So from my perspective, as a person watching these cases, if the victim's family, which are the ones most effective, of course, and the ones that absolutely have the right to feel like this has been a fair process, if they're willing to accept that, they're willing to accept the plea deal, I think to a certain extent we have to defer and we have to say, hey, they're okay with it. Therefore, the people that were out there watching that were maybe thinking this would be a conviction, we need to be okay with that as well. But one thing I do strongly agree from is she should not profit from this. She should not be able to put on the alligator tears and go get book, movie, TV deals to make it seem like she's totally an innocent angel and all of this. That should not be a thing that's going on here. I think that her profit should be restricted. Yeah, she may do OF, but she shouldn't do OF in a way that profits off of this. But I want to know what you guys think who've been following this case and maybe who are interested in commenting. Is this enough time? Let me know in the comments below, and I will catch you on the next one.